Hi everyone, it's Mindy and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to use a 3D embossing folder with a coordinating die. Now, one of my favorite things about using 3D embossing folders is the incredible depth and texture that it can add to a project. But when you combine it with a coordinating die, it's going to take your project to a whole new level. The 3D embossing folder that I'm going to be using today is called Adrift Air Balloon from Simon Says Stamp. It is one of the products from the brand new release, and it has a background just filled with hot air balloons and then also two coordinating dies. So there's a larger hot air balloon and a smaller one. One of the first things that I will do is I'm going to take those dies and I'm going to cut them out of white cardstock. I'm using Hammermill cardstock today, so I will die cut those and then set them off on the side. The next thing that I'm going to do is add ink to my background before I run it through the 3D embossing folder. I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Morning ink, and I'm starting at the top of the cardstock and blending my way down. What I wanted to do is kind of have it a little bit darker at the top and then kind of have it fade off towards the bottom. Now, I don't end up using this background, but I still wanted to show you the steps that you would take to do this. So you actually have a few different ideas that you're going to get out of the video. Then I'm going to take my background, I'm placing it inside of my embossing folder, and I will be using my Gina K Designs Intracut die cut machine. I am using the setting that Gina and Heidi had recommended during their live, which is setting it to 2D, and then the bottom dial is at 0. I'm going to bring in that platform, place my embossing folder on top, and run that through, and it gives me amazing texture for with the embossing folder, and it's not crinkling my paper, which I find I usually get is crinkling of the cardstock. So you can see that turned out amazing. I have beautiful pressure that was applied on both sides of the cardstock. Now I'm going to take those balloons that I die cut earlier. I have one large and two smaller ones, and I'm going to use apple ink and a smaller blending brush, and I'm going to add color to these as well before I run them through the die cut machine. But again, I don't end up using these balloons. I'll talk about how I changed my mind throughout this as we go. But this is something that you can definitely do is by adding that ink. Again, I went a little heavier handed towards the top of the air balloon and then lighter as I got down towards the bottom. I'm going to place some repositionable tape on the back of each of these hot air balloons, and I'm going to line them up in the embossing folder. There are a few different balloons that fit these sizes perfectly, and by putting that repositionable tape on the back, it's kind of lightly tacking that down to the embossing folder so they don't move when I run it through the die cut machine. You definitely want to have your balloons die cut first before doing the embossing folder because otherwise, if you emboss and then die cut, you're going to flatten it and not get that dimension. Again, I'm using that same sandwich as before, and I'm running that through the intricate die cut machine, and that's going to add all of that detail onto those balloons. So I'll carefully peel it up. It does have a little bit of tack yet on the back of it, but I didn't find I left any residue on the embossing folder. This is how I end up creating my balloons a little later on in the video. I just ended up changing the color of them. At this point, I was thinking I was kind of ready to move on to my sentiment. I had the components for my background, and I'm going to be using this brand new Smile stamp set. It is an amazing stamp set with so many encouraging sentiments, and I really love that fine line smile sentiment, that larger one. There is also a standalone die that says smile too. So you'll see me using this set a lot. I'm going to stamp this on white cardstock. Again, this is Hammermill cardstock. I used Hammermill for all of my cardstock in the video today, stamping those sentiments down gently. Then with this sentiment, there are coordinating dies for the word your and the word smile. And I think there's a couple other smaller ones in there. So I'm going to line up those coordinating dies, hold them down with a low tack tape, and run them through the die cut machine. There isn't a coordinating die for all of these strip sentiments. So I'm using the sentiments label die to die cut those out. Now, I have a mini Empress machine that I like to use for smaller items. So I ran my sentiment strip through the mini Empress machine, and I don't know if it shifted while I was running it through there because of the magnet or what, or just operator error, but it ended up being crooked. So I stamped a new sentiment and decided to just pick a different one while I was at it, stamping the sentiment again onto white cardstock and then trimming that out. And I used my Intracut to trim that out this time. I like to stack my sentiment, especially with something like this word smile, where it kind of gets a little small. So I am going to add some of this liquid glue to the back of the word smile and then stack up the sentiment. This glue is also brand new with the Simon Says stamp release. It does come in a larger bottle and a smaller bottle. It has kind of a fine tip to it, which I find very useful. And it's just kind of the right consistency. It's not really runny, but I don't have to squeeze very hard at all to get the glue to come out of the bottle. Then once I have my sentiment strip build up with multiple layers as well, I'm placing it, all of the components, I'm kind of bringing them all together. Now on screen, looking back at it, it does not look that bad, but when I was creating it, I just wasn't getting the vibe. So I thought maybe I would kind of rein in some of that background by trimming out a panel of white cardstock using the Arches die. I am a huge, huge Arches fan. I just love Arches in my card designs. So again, I held that down with some low tack tape. I centered it on the front of my cardstock panel and ran that through my intricate machine. Now, again, looking at it now, it's not as bad as I thought it was, but at the time, I wasn't feeling it. I wasn't feeling those two colors together. So I went ahead and embossed some more balloons. And this time I thought I would go with my default, which is a rainbow. So I am ink blending on guava to one of the balloons and then also combining it with zest. Zest ends up being a pretty intense yellow, so I did bring in a little bit of watermelon to try and balance that out. For another balloon, I have sprout and marine, adding both of those colors to each side. And then the last balloon, I'm going to do marine and lilac. So I was trying to get in all the colors of the rainbow on the balloon. Now, bringing these balloons back over to the panel I had already done, I felt like the blues were kind of getting lost in my balloons. They were just almost too close together for a shade, or maybe I just went too heavy handed with the background. So, again, I did another panel. This time I did not add ink beforehand. I actually embossed it and then applied ink. And I'm using a large blending brush to apply that ink. So, using a blending brush afterwards, it's going to catch some of those raised areas a little bit more than others. Then I splattered it with some white acrylic paint, white acrylic spray from Hero Arts, and now I'm adding my balloons. And you can see that these are fitting right over some of the balloons that are actually on that card front. And I'm just using a tape runner to add those. I thought about popping up the balloons with some foam squares, but I had already created a frame, that Arches frame I really wanted to use. So I figured I would just add the dimension to the frame. I am using a thin foam tape from Altenew that I'm kind of going around all of the edges with. Then after I remove the backing, I'm going to place this over the front so it's still kind of reining in that design just a little bit. I'll then take my stacked smile sentiment and I'm going to place that right kind of in the center of that card front, making sure my margins are even on each side. Then I will use the word your. So I will place that kind of right in there. I love how that smaller sentiment just kind of tucks into that little space and then adding the smaller strip underneath. I'm going to come in with some embellishments. I thought this needed just a little bit of sparkle. And I'm going to have these embellishments and also all of the products that I actually used to create this card linked down below in the video description and over on my blog. So again, I'm using that Simon Says stamp glue to just add a dot of glue and then placing my sequence over the top. So while my initial idea kind of took a little detour along the way, I hope you still find this helpful when you are working with 3D embossing folders and a coordinating die. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Here is another video that I think you might enjoy.